And when he looked at the backpack, he looked at his wife, he said, "The backpack shrunk." Sounds like a joke, but I had the same thing happen to me this summer. Rabbi Guzik challenged me when we went on a trip as the kids were at camp. She said, 1 carry-on. You can do it. 1 carry-on. She even helped me. She bought me those vacuum bags, right, that you can seal and put everything basically in a little container. But when you don't seal it right, the backpack shrinks. Packing for a trip is a very serious endeavor. You have to ask yourselves, what do I need within the limits of what I can actually bring? And the same applies when you come home from a trip. Perhaps, like me, you've been designated sometimes as the sweeper. At the end of a trip, visiting a hotel or somebody's house, you do that last sweep around to make sure that everything that you brought is going to come home with you. As my mother famously tells me, if you forget it, perhaps it wasn't that important anyway. We are in the midst of travel season here in Los Angeles in this country, but also travel season in the Torah. This morning we read, as Olivia did so beautifully, about our forefather Jacob, Yaakov, and he faces this same dilemma when he's about to wrestle with that angel, when his name changes from Yaakov to Yisrael. We focus on that sentence where the angel and Jacob wrestle, but for a moment we're going to focus in the moment just before the struggle. Right before Jacob is preparing to meet his brother Esav, the Torah tells us he literally takes all of his possessions he needs, all of his family members that are going to go with him. It goes over the river, and the Torah tells us, Vayevater Yaakov levado, that Jacob remained alone. Seems strange. How could Jacob remain alone when he just brought everything and everybody that he needs to go meet his brother Jacob? The 12th century Torah commentator, the Dot Zikanim, explains or asks, why did Jacob remain all alone when he already brought everything and everybody with him? The answer the Dot Zikanim gives us is that when he got his family and belongings over to where they needed to be, he had to go back. He had to see if anything was left. He had to make sure that he did not forget anything. The word levado, meaning alone. The rabbis say if you take that word and you replace one letter, the bet, with the chaf, you get Vayevater Yaakov lichado. And instead of in English saying Jacob remained alone, lichado, it would mean Jacob remained with little jars or little containers. In essence, Jacob was looking to make sure that he remembered the small things, the things that mattered. Mark Gerson, in a newly published book called God Was Right, How Modern Social Science Proves That the Torah is True, expands on this idea. He gives us a few answers of why Jacob remained alone. He says, he quotes the Talmud, that the rabbis say that these were not beautiful, valuable, antique jars that he was with, but rather they were simple items. And so Mark Gerson asks in his book, did the small things really matter that he went back to get those? He's about to have this important meeting with his brother, and he goes back and he gets the little jars that he forgot. But how many times have you or I or us forgotten the small things behind? A piece of clothing, a book, an electronic, something that may seem so valuable in the moment, but in essence, it's just a small thing. Something that in the rush of the chaos just doesn't make it in our bag. And so perhaps my mother was right. If you leave it behind, it may not be that important. But that's for the physical. Because on the spiritual side, the small things, those small things, is what matters most. The Lubavitcher Rebbe taught that even the most mundane matters should be imbued with holy intentions and be consistent with the greatest purpose of creation. And so if the Lubavitcher Rebbe tells us that every moment, even every small moment, can be holy, we must ask ourselves, is there actually such a thing as a small moment? So when Jacob crossed that river and went back to get the small things, perhaps they weren't small at all. This is apparent in our Jewish tradition and our rituals, just to name a few. The night before Passover, what do? Bidikat chametz. We search for bread. But if you have the opportunity to do it, right, with the feather and the candle and the spoon, we don't search for loaves of bread, but what do we search for? Crumbs. Exactly. The small things, in the smallest places. And when does Shabbat conclude? Shabbat concludes not when we see the Big Dipper or any other constellation in the sky, but how many stars? 3. 3 small stars that you can barely see. And when does Shabbat begin? When you light the 2 candles. The smallest moment, the smallest second, the smallest millisecond that we go from no light to 2 beautiful Shabbat candles on our table in the smallest moments. And so every moment matters, only if we take the moment to make it matter. As I just said before, as Cantor Feldman chanted Shir LaMa'alot, Omer Shem Tov, the released hostage after 505 days, stood on this bima 2 weeks ago. Some of you were here. It was a miraculous moment, something that we will never forget. And he shared during his speech about how the small things matter sometimes when they are only taken away. He talked about a piece of bread. He talked about one breath. He talked about what it meant to be in a tunnel and finally see one ray of sunshine. This past week, in speaking with a member of Sinai Temple, and we were talking big ideas, he said, Rabbi, you know what? And this is before he knew what I was going to say. He said, it's the small things that matter. He said, it's the car ride with my children on the way to school, a family dinner that they have each night, the side conversations that they weren't expecting. Because small things, as we know, lead to great moments. In 1978, Rabbi Joseph Soloveitchik, one of the greatest theologians of this century, he gave a eulogy for the Rebbitzin of Talna. And when he gave this eulogy, what he spoke about were the small things that mattered, and he spoke about his own mother. This is what he said. He said, I used to watch her arranging the house in honor of a holiday. I used to see her recite the prayers. I used to watch her recite the blessings every Friday night. I learned from her very much. He didn't say which Talmud or which Torah portion he learned from her, but he watched her do the small things that made him become a great rabbi. Watching the small things and then doing the small things that matter. In fact, Maimonides, in his Laws of Repentance, Hilchot Teshuvah, which we read right before the High Holy Days and study them, teaches that everyone should consider the next thing that we say or do, whether big or small. It should be the difference between destruction and salvation. A more mundane example for us in Westwood. John Wooden, the Wizard of Westwood, who knew how to win basketball championships like no other. The story is told that at every beginning of each season, even though he knew they were going to win the championship, he would sit his players down and literally teach them how to put on their socks and tie their shoes. And when a player years later was asked, well, didn't you already know how to do that? He said, John Wooden was not an expert in how to remove blisters from your feet, but he was an expert in how to build relationships and how to put sacredness into those relationships. Small things. Even a smile. Even a smile can make that difference. The Rebbitzin Esther Jungreis was in the Bergen-Belsen concentration camp during the Holocaust, and her father gave her and other children just one instruction. He told his children, children, smile, because when a grown-up sees a young child smiling, it will give them hope. It will give them hope. We see that every single week here on this bima. We saw Olivia's precious smile as she led us in the service this morning. A small, contagious smile can make the biggest difference in the world. Yes, Vayivater Yaakov levado. Jacob might have been alone on the other side of the river with no possessions or family. But as he wrestled the angels, he was not alone. Because as we learn from that verse, he might have been physically separated, but spiritually, he had everything he needed. And so over these next few weeks, we will travel. Some of us may walk down the street. Others may fly up the coast. Some traveling across the country, and some even across the world. But as we do that and we travel, let's remember Jacob. Let's make sure that our backpack does not shrink, but has just enough room to include all the small things that truly matter in the days ahead. Shabbat Shalom.